and I see that we have um, some of our stakeholder liaisons from the regions. It's great to see you on the call, and perhaps, and I'm also very pleased that Jaska was able to put together some of the materials to help us think about the development of the Impacts Explorer and ways that we can help. So why don't we just, I'm going to hand over to you for a bit, Jim, it'd be great to sort of step through and have a few updates as people have them. So but we'll start with you.
Okay, you mean just general updates?
Sure.
Thanks. Well, I've been working on this USDA National Agricultural Research Data Network proposal that's due this week. And Cheryl and I have been working on that and getting input from 13 other locations, universities that will be involved in that across the U.S. And building on what we've learned in AgMIP about harmonizing data for models, it will be harmonizing the data and making them interoperable from different locations around the U.S. and we hope to go even broader than the first 13 states if we're successful. But so we'll be submitting that on Friday, and I think that's the main thing I wanted to talk about. I'd like to hear. I'm anxious to hear about the Explorer, Impacts Explorer information. So look forward to it.
Thanks, Jim. I just one thing to add to the update that you provided was, although this is starting basically with harmonization of some of the data that's available from land-grant institutions in the U.S., it's using a framework that is intended to be applied internationally as well, and that we do actually have a piece of it that is reaching out to the CG system through, I believe, Molly John. So I see we have John Recha on the call, and he's one of our CG collaborators. And we're really hoping that we're able to, basically bring this forward as a resource that is really helping with model exploration and data access and discoverability overall. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think I appreciate your saying that. In fact, as I've been going to different meetings, I've also talked to people in Brazil and China and other places who seem to be very interested. I mean, this is needed worldwide, and there needs to be a way that we discover, know what the data are, and access it for doing all kinds of analysis that we just can't do now. So we're really pleased that we have already some work with the CGIAR, working with the Ag Trials group at CIOT, but through Molly's connections and also Meta Davari, we hope to continue to expand that.
Great. I'll open the floor for anyone else that has any sort of announcements or updates that they would like to briefly provide. Just identify yourself and take the floor.
I guess, Carolyn, this is Ken. I would say that we had a very successful AgMIP rice crop modeling session in Milan. I would say we had about 12 out of the 16 modelers there in a group of about 30. And we had some really great discussions on the papers developing for CO2 response testing, for temperature response testing, and planned a lot of additional new activities that seemed very ambitious, including discussing genetics, getting genetics in the crop models, and one that's important is to visualize adaptations in multiple ways, management and genetics within the rice team. And I just learned from Sintold that the wheat team is ahead of the rice team again. They've been discussing the same issues. So that, in a nutshell, was I thought it was a very successful AgMIP rice model improvement. And in your comparison session.
Great, thanks for that update. Does anyone have any questions for Ken? My screen is going kind of wild here with a Wallace and Gromit dog in the background. I'm not quite sure whose desktop we're looking at, but it's at least interesting.
It's my desktop, but I'm using two monitors. I thought you only saw the one with the
agenda.
Yeah.
No, but I really like Gromit, so I'm glad that you have him as your desktop.
I'll see what I can do.
It's okay. May I invite anyone else to provide an update briefly, please? Maybe Wendy Lynn, would you be willing to just give a brief comment on things that you have underway with folks in the South Asia region?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. We're getting ready for the South Asia Stakeholder Liaison Exchange. And so we have a meeting coming up in Chennai and multiple mini events happening on that program. And we'll have Sonali, Roberto joining the team in South India, as well as Farah from Pakistan, Buhle from Zimbabwe, and Meena from IGB. And of course, Laxman will be hosting us, and Geeta. So we're very excited. We've had a meeting or two to discuss the overall program and trying to make some progress on looking at the specific agenda of the different mini events. Unfortunately, Amy won't be there, but she's been involved in these planning meetings. So things are going pretty well. We've also been working with the teams individually, one-on-one, to get the key messages ready for Yoske and team. And I think we've made some significant progress on that. So she'll fill you in on how many of those key messages we have. Yeah, I think that's it. We're having a lot of discussions, and in November we have every month we have a monthly update with the stakeholder liaisons on their activities. So we're looking forward to hearing on November 3rd at our next meeting what the liaisons have been doing in terms of engaging stakeholders in the regions.
Great, thanks. Geeta, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Hi everybody, I'm Geeta here. Good morning to all of you. Here we are making all the arrangements for the upcoming meeting, and we are trying to give invitation individually to the stakeholders, especially for the policy makers, and we are quite progressing well, I think. And Dr. Params is making arrangements for the RAPS meeting. So all the arrangements are on now, and we have done all the logistics, kind of booking the hotels and all. So maybe tomorrow afternoon, all the team members will receive the updates about the hotel booking and all. And so I think we are progressing quite well. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that update. Okay, I think in the interest of time and all of our wanting to learn a little bit more about things that are underway with the Impacts Explorer, we might go to that, and then I'll encourage discussion involving many of the rest of you. We have nice participation today, so thank you for joining. Yoske, are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am. One question first: is everybody seeing the agenda now, or still my?
Yes, the agenda is up.
Okay, so no more dogs?
Well, the dog is in the background, so it's nice to know he's there.
Okay. I was getting away. Sorry. The other thing is, Sander is also here. Does Sander want to do the kickoff? What do you think, Sander? Or are you going to do a number 2 mainly of the agenda?
Number 2, the data part, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I can say something about that. I think I can also do a small kickoff, Yoske. Hello,
okay,
everybody. I think where we are now with the Impact Explorer is a bit in between things. So we are, we have got some, I think that you will hear throughout the presentation. We have some things available, and we are looking at other things. But it's hard to say when something is final or when we've got the complete set.
On the web webinar.
So it's a bit of it's in a way a bit of a chicken and egg in the sense that we are working now on things, but we don't have the complete set, so we can't fully tell how it will work out in the end. But it's progressing, I think. Okay, I will leave it at that for now.
So then I'll tell about the progress. That's a nice part. The stakeholder unit has been working very hard with the teams to start gathering the key messages from the regional research teams. We have a couple until now from Pakistan, West Africa, a first try, and the Indo-Gangetic Basin. And just before this meeting, I also received the key messages from South India, which we're of course also very happy with because of our trip to South India and the intention to make a mock-up of the Impacts Explorer for that trip. A few things I noticed, and that's why this exercise is so very useful for us as well, but I think mainly for the researchers and the people who are want the best out of this Impacts Explorer. Is on this you can approach the key messages or the design of the Impacts Explorer from a few angles, of course. What do we want? Do we want a very concise presentation of main key messages, thinking about, for instance, how the CLIPS team did that? Or do we want a more extended version, more expanded, more explanatory? We already saw that the contributions from Pakistan, for instance, are more extensive. They have this theme, impact of climate change on rice wheat cropping system, and then tell of sort of a story where climate has one page, yield reduction has one page, and economic impact also has 3 pages, so filling the template 3 times. And that is, of course, one way to go about it, to tell the full story. And that is something we'll have to see how that works out with the stakeholders. Is that will it be too extensive? Will there be too much to read on an interactive site? Will people lose their interest? Do they want to have the results more directly, more concise? So we have now. I'm trying to go a bit lower from actually. So you can put Pakistan, West Africa, Indo-Gangetic Basin, and South India. We have 4 sets we can work with and make designs with and see how they work out. And the CLIPS team has, of course, the earlier messages and is this week reworking them. I saw a mail from Sabina with some ideas on that. And East Africa sent the policy briefs with that also has a nice first page with very concise messages that may be used and transformed into key message pages. And last but not least, South Africa messages are also expected this week. So when we have all the materials collected, then we can make an overview and examples and see of examples how this would work out in the Impacts Explorer, and also compare them regarding content and level of detail, and see whether teams were able to manage this new format. That's of course a very important question. We do not want to force them into a format which doesn't support their message. Yeah, that's it on the key messages. So I'm very optimistic that we can we have the main first set this week, and we can start analyzing them or working with them. Do you have any comments or questions on this? I do not hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Is everybody still there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you,
this
Alex.
is
Sorry, I think.
Jonathan.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Jonathan. I'm on the line. I just want to inform you that I'm on the line, but I'm listening.
Okay, good.
Yeah, This is Alex here. I think what happened was we were all muted at one point to keep things quiet, so it took me a second to get off.
Okay.
The key messages that you're getting, I think are definitely wonderful, but could you say something about kind of your plans to transition into the new key messages as opposed to the ones from the earlier phase? Is it still basically focused on, in terms of this stage of your development, on the previous key messages?
Well, that is a very good question, Alex. And for that, we may have to jump a bit forward to the data. The idea, well, I think the agreement was, and that's something that Sander can express very well, that the Impact Explorer would mainly present results from phase 1. And I understand that there is a tension if you want to improve the key messages, update them. That is a thing. The key messages have to be supported by the data that are included in the Impact Explorer as well. There has to be a link between them. And
Yeah,
that is,
I remember this conversation, yeah, and it certainly makes sense that at this stage, you're focused on the data that you have and the key messages that can be interpreted from the results in phase 1. But my understanding was that what you're doing here is you're building something that hopefully we can slot the new data and the new messages in as they come. And of course, where we are in the project right now, those data are still months away. That's actually the point of my question, is the new data are probably still months away. Maybe you're getting some trickling in, but it's exciting to kind of do this, because I think the second time, with when the new data come in and when people are interpreting the messages, this time with the stakeholder liaisons really kind of seeing the process happening, as opposed to picking up data sets that already were created and interpreting messages from a prior project. I think this will be an exciting time.
it is a strategic question as well. So maybe Sander will want to say something about this, about phase 1, phase 2 transition. Sander, do you have a view on this?
Well, I think our first priority now is to get a complete set of the key messages and learn also from the teams how much effort this takes for them to do this. And I think that determines a lot what we can do for the second phase, data and key messaging. So hopefully, I mean, if it's, and I'm not sure about that, but if it's only replacing the data under the key messages, so the key messages stays the same, but the data changes a bit or is more refined, that's relatively easy. But if also the whole key message changes, of course, it has a bigger impact and requires more thinking also of the teams itself. And I mean, I'm not sure about that. Maybe if you mean, and I think we only know this when we get a complete set of the phase 2 results, or first set of phase 2 results, where we can really start seeing this in different crop, climate, economic analysis, what the differences are between the two phases and whether they point in the same direction or go off in completely different directions.
Yeah, I think this may also be, I would say it's not going to be, or hopefully it's not going to be a completely different key message, but I think there will be different types of messages potentially coming out. It could be as simple as this is a different place, or a different adaptation that the message applies to. Something like that could be interesting. So again, the idea of setting up this template, setting up the approach, and then seeing, as those new data come in, hopefully it would be faster to create the second time. You already have the East Africa people knowing what they want to do and where, but now we're talking about a larger region of Kenya, or a different region of Kenya, for example. And yeah, so I think the overall bottom line messages hopefully will be consistent, but you may find, for example, that there's new key messages in phase 2, for example, on the comparison between this high development future and the low development future.
I think, of course, you don't want to finish. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sander.
I think this is a crucial point you touch on, Alex, that we put a process in place now where people, each of us knows what to do and what our role is. So this is also, I think, something Joske will come through, is about how do we make sure that the messages all have the same sort of setup and the same sort of way of speaking about things, that it appears a bit consistent. And this, I mean, this is a process we have to organize as a project to ensure that it all speaks the same language and goes into the same direction. And now I think we are establishing the process, and hopefully we can do it faster a second time or third time. But I cannot say much about it now. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I think what we're doing on this call. I see Wendy and Amy are both on. This and Jonathan and others, who are involved directly in the stakeholder liaison. This kind of back and forth, where we hear what the key messages is, as you summarized here, and then you guys give your feedback, and it's that kind of iteration that will clarify those roles in the procedure. I think make this go a little bit forward. So anyway, that's a good answer. Thank you.
I'm going to encourage that we please, maybe step through the presentation, because I don't want to short shrift any of the information points that you have, and I can't see the whole agenda anymore. There we go. So why don't we just try to let the Impacts Explorer team present the rest of their the results and findings so far, and then let's have a discussion. Just note your questions, and we'll come back to them. I really want to have a good conversation, but let's hear all the information they have to share first.
Okay, well, for the data, just a few lines before Sander takes over. The whole setup of the Impact Explorer, I'll go to the last page. You can see it here. So from the key message, the users should be able to go to a data exploration tool, which allows them to go a bit deeper into the data, try out some things, make some variation. That means, of course, that there has to be a link between the key messages, the graphs and visuals, and the data that are available in the Impacts Explorer. So that's the second thing. To what extent do we now have the data that support these key messages? Now I give the floor to Sander.
Okay, thank you, Joske. So we received some of the data for the key messages, for recreating the key messages, I should say. So for crop data, we have the data for Siwara, and also for economic data, we have the West Africa data, the summary tables from Roberto, and from crop, we got it from Cheryl and Chris. And for climate data, we have one of the 50 inputs to visualize. So what we are doing now is to try to connect it to the key messages we have, to see if we can recreate from the data we have some visuals that go with the key messages. We're using the book for this, so the first phase 1 result book that I borrowed from the library and is now late with the fine. So we have the book, and then we're checking whether that book makes sense with the key messages, and we can get some graph out, and we can recreate that graph from the complete set of data we have. I think the guys here are puzzling on it, and but they're getting to the point where they might have some questions going back to it, to the data, to see if they are understanding things correctly. So in this way, we try to get these two things together, the key messages and the data. It is really working, trying to recreate for one region or for a couple of regions the key message. Of course, it's good if we get the data for more regions, because then we can check if we make one region, whether it's the same in another region. As I think the key messages have some variation in them, in what they discuss and why they discuss certain things, which is dependent on the local context of the regions. And and this way we can see if all ways of visualizing things make sense. We don't want to have one region very well done and then a bad thing for the other regions. So that's it, I think. So there's a demand here for more climate data to recreate some of the corresponding graphs, and also for more crop and economic data that is implicit to work with more regions. And yeah, if that's possible. that's it for the data. So if you have questions to this, then
thanks, Sander. I think I have a question that pertains to the difference between a graphic that represents data for scientists and a message that represents an interpretation for a more public-facing person. But I'd like to hold on that kind of discussion until we actually have a little bit more of the presentation, because I don't want to run out of the time. So can I encourage that we perhaps continue?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so, well then, next thing, and that's there's one thing I should not forget, but the question also on the data topic is that if the Altera team needs some explanation, we're not exactly sure who to turn to. That's, for instance, on these data and how they relate to the key messages. But that has to do with collaboration. So how are we going to deal with all the content that's coming in now, key messages, data sets, especially key messages and text that has to go into the, I'll scroll down slowly, to the background information blocks that are required to understand the key messages. We need some sort of editing process for that, and also knowing some roles, knowing who is responsible for what. Our first idea was that Altera would do the sort of the format check, length, completeness, that sort of stuff. So does the content fit into the template that and its structure that we designed for the Impact Explorer? That perhaps Sherry, Carolyn, well, especially Sherry, I guess, would do the content tuning, text style and visuals for readability, understandability. The testing with the users for usefulness, effectiveness, engagement, satisfaction, etc., the type of indicators can be done by Altera together with Sherry. And there's a final redaction necessary for consistency of content in the Impact Explorer. What this still leaves out is the testing of the and the refining of the messages with the stakeholders, so the fine-tuning of the messages themselves. And also there's not much on how the what Alex just touched upon, how the new messages can be integrated or how changes can be made. Well, of course, we work in iterations, so this is not a one-time process. We have in mind that, or planned the first prototype to be finished in January, the second prototype in July, and that the final version would be available in December next year, which means we would go through this cycle 3 times, which should leave enough room for new information and changes. On the other hand, it can also make it a bit difficult, a bit complex, with people going back, for their ID perhaps, to the same message again, or the same piece of software again. But we'll try and keep the process lean and mean. Well, this is a bit academic almost, how we see how this works, until we have the first set of messages that we can send around for comments. But I'd like to hear your first ideas about this, your first response. Is this feasible, for instance, and is it a logical division of roles? What do you think?
I'm going to be the first to speak, but I hope that others will also. I think that it's really good to have identified the need for some process and some areas of responsibility to be maybe further defined, so that we can advance in a stepwise manner where people understand, where each person understands what their role is in contribution. And this is really very much a joint effort. So it might be helpful to draft some tables that basically show where we are in terms of material received and responsible parties for the development of if there are iterations on key messages that are needed, a process that each team has to decide about that. Anyway, I think that's my main comment right now. I'm going to just basically see if there are people who are participating from the teams, if they have comments or questions. So maybe I'll just invite Lieven and John, if you have comments based on things that you have, or Geeta and people in South India, please, if you have questions about these kinds of things. I think we're relying on the teams to help make sure that this is an underway, doable process, and so your inputs are needed.
Hello everybody, here's Sabine. Maybe I can give a short comment from CLIP. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
We went a bit in a loop because we felt we had these first sets of key messages, and we extensively consulted stakeholders about these key messages, and we are now a bit delaying because we really want to make sure that we have kind of a policymaker or a decision maker in front of us, and we design these key messages so that they really touch the key issues that we found out through the stakeholder engagement, more than having the data available and the kind of illustrations that we used before. And in so far, we are kind of challenged to, or we may go a bit overboard of phase 1 results. For example, we focused in phase 1 very much on maize as a crop, and the key issue in Zimbabwe was that maize as a crop cannot provide the answer to adapt to climate change. So we are now pulling in results from phase 2 to illustrate other crops and their potential to adapt to climate change. So what I'm saying is, I think it's really important to pick up those issues that stakeholders considered as important, and then see if we can incorporate them either as key message or as background material to substantiate or further beef up these key messages. Yeah.
Yeah, Sabine, I agree completely. It's let's try and see to what extent that would be a problem for our process. I think we should try to be flexible and aim for a useful product and not for the easiest process, but for a feasible process. There are ways, I think, that we can include key messages, even if not all the data then are directly accessible through these key messages, so that they're still integrated in the system. And I appreciate very much also that that the stakeholders have indicated that these messages are the most important and the most relevant, of course. So I think there will be a workaround or some solution for many of the problems that we encounter like this over the next few months. And it all depends a bit on also I have to ask Sandra again, on the format of the data, because that was the most the factor that might be an obstacle. If now the background, so the place for this data is set up in a certain manner, and then it has to include data which have a completely different format, that will be quite an important effort, which we might not be able to make, but as long as the data have the same format, it should not be a problem to do the updates. That's correct, isn't it, Sandra?
Yes, Joske, that's fully correct.
So in that case, I think we also would prefer the messages that have been fine-tuned with the stakeholders. And also, of course, we encourage this template, this format, but due to the different key messages, we will see some variations occurring anyway, and also some differences in the amount of text versus visuals. I think we will be able to manage this variation.
Yeah, I think also at some point we should evaluate when we have a status for all the teams how context specific the key messages are and the attached visuals. But so it might, you know, why now we're trying to put everything in one sort of standard form, but that might not be the best way to work with the stakeholders. And I think maybe after, you know, now it's a bit difficult to discuss it because we don't have a prototype to really go into that. But after, let's say, the February meeting, we could see, I think, a test could be made with stakeholders to see if that format really works for the stakeholders in a certain region, or whether something else is required. And then we still have some time to make changes to the format of the thing.
Yeah.
To the setup. I think that.
Can I comment on that, Sander?
Yes, of course, Wendy.
Hi. I think that's a key question that is sort of a little bit of an elephant in the room because we're not directly asking that question. But the question of, you know, who is the main user of the Impact Explorer product? And so your indication being that we're hoping that the regional team stakeholders will be using the Impact Explorer, which is why we did that activity in Zimbabwe, trying to ask them, you know, what kind of information they use now and what would they be able to use from AgMIP. And then in South India, we'll have the same kind of examples. So I think it's going to be important for us to have some consensus about who the final users of this IE are, and I think that has implications for how we develop it into the future. So another point I wanted to make is that on Alex's question about the transitioning from phase 1 into phase 2 and being able to, you know, put that data from phase 2 into the template at the last moment of the project. I think that's very ambitious considering how long it's taken us to get the key messages from phase 1. So I think everyone needs to have a reality check on how challenging that's going to be for Altera. And so what could be useful right now as a suggestion is, as Sander is saying, you know, each team is different, each team is in a different place. So maybe what we could do is, as we look at the key messages from phase 1, we need to link those with the plans for phase 2. And then we need to identify very specifically what the changes are going to be. Is it going to be a new site? Is it going to be a new crop? Is it going to be a new adaptation package or a new type of rack process? So when we can identify for each of the teams what those changes might be, and then the third element of change could be that the new protocol changes the output of the data. And I think we have to build in that possibility too. So maybe for each of the teams, we could build in this anticipated change so that then in the meantime, before the end of the project, we can be thinking about how easily that could be transformed within the IE. So I have other thoughts on engagement, but I think that's all I'm going to say for now, because one thing that I'm noticing is that we're sort of treating separately the development of the tool versus the engagement of the participants, and I think over time we need to start seeing that as one thing, because otherwise I'm wondering who the final user is of this tool. So those are my comments.
This is John in Nairobi. Hi all.
Hi John, good to hear your voice. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I had a meeting with Livin together with some of the NARBIPES team members. That's the crop economics team. And from our discussion, we actually did define and prioritize specific engagement activities for East Africa, and also a plan for pulling together key messages and data from phase 1. What we'll solve is, as you know, I think Livin can talk about this. We were to be struggling to distill the key messages, but I have gotten all the information that was put together in terms of policy briefs, as well as the assessment reports for Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So as of right now, I'm taking the first go at putting together the information to populate the Impact Explorer template, and then based on that, I'll share with my team members just for input, and then also we'll involve Amy and Wendelin in this. So in the next 1 month or so, I think we should be having a document that we'll be able to share, because it takes a while to go through the data and try to understand what is the record they're working on. However, I'll say when I look at the iterations for the first prototype of that first of January 2016, yeah, I think that's possible. But I think when we move forward with the second prototype, version 1, by December, I still think it's a little bit ambitious, because we may not necessarily have achieved the, gathering all the info. Although I'll say we have a plan in place, and then we'll get to see how the teams are working as we move forward from the region. And the beauty about East Africa is in phase 2, we're living in phase 1, we'll be working in new sites, and they are all CCAF sites. I know most of the stakeholders in these sites because I've been working with them for the past 4 years. And so as we move into those sites and then do the stakeholder engagement, it will be easy to tap into the policymakers as well as the advisory service providers whom I engage in the course of doing participatory research. So on that part, it will be easy to actually involve them as we continue building the tools. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Lieven, did you have anything you'd like to add, or are you okay?
I'm okay. I think John made a very good summary of the situation in East Africa. But maybe one remark is to, well, it has already been said many times, is that we really need to be prepared for, well, moving from phase 1 to phase 2, because there's going to be different questions, there are going to be other study areas. So Sandra and Joske, I really think we need to think about that very carefully, that the format of the Internet Explorer is ready for that. But yeah, it has already been mentioned many times, so yeah, that's it.
Great. Thanks. I'm just wondering, I see Mina is here from the Indo-Gangetic region, and you've provided some of your key messages. Do you have any comments or concerns based on what's been presented so far? I know it takes a little time to find that unmute button. Okay, Mina, I'm going to just...
In the meantime, I could say...
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah. In the meantime, I could just say something in response to what Lieven said about the Internet Explorer. If you want the Internet Explorer, you should call Microsoft. In the case of the Impact Explorer, we can do something. I think the point is that we need a basic set to work with. So even, we don't want to wait for phase 2 results to be final before we start making key messages and running them by stakeholders, because by that time we will be far too late in the project. So for us, it's crucial now to have a first working set, even if not perfect, or if you're not, but to have a first working set and start this process of working with the key messages and see how it links to the data. Because if we do that very late in the project, we will be completely lost by that time. to do it. So I think that's just to make it clear, we realize that there will be more advanced and nicer messages coming in phase 2, and that might be a good response to the stakeholder needs. However, we still also need to do something now because you want to progress with that. And if you can fold it into your process you have anyhow with the stakeholders, that's very good. And use some of the insights already now in the key messages, that's even better. But please keep on sending these key messages. And don't hold back on it.
Sander, can I ask?
I'd just like to add to that I think it's really important for things like Sabine was saying, and if the key message may be that this study of a single crop does not sufficiently represent the system to be useful without incorporation of additional information from other crops, other practices, and I think it's absolutely fine for these kinds of messages to be included. It shows that you can step through a process of assessing something. You can have a message that includes that other things need to be taken into consideration, and then you'll have phase 2 results down the line, perhaps, that are able to address some of those concerns. Because that's the natural process of investigation, is to find out that maybe what you've done so far isn't sufficient and you need to go back and look again. And I think it's okay to be presenting that. It's best if you can actually have a few more of the results that are more system oriented, or maybe you exercise the economics tool and explain how you can move past the limitations of one crop utilizing that. I don't know, there's lots of opportunities for conveying information or messages. So perhaps one of the challenges is figuring out the most critical messages to convey. So I wonder, is there going to be a lookbook of the messages that are coming in from the teams, or could we do that so that people can go in and take a look at the key messages? I mean, I know that you're sharing them between the stakeholder unit and the Impacts Explorer, but there may be others who'd like to sort of take a look and see what other teams are putting in, and just to have a sense of, the materials that could come into this, whether it's just files in the Google Drive or whatever. But I think that might be helpful because I think, well, anyway, that's just a suggestion. Okay, anyone else?
I just had one comment, a question for Sander, because I think that we have to think about this tool, the Impacts Explorer, in its lifetime. So right now it's being built, but perhaps it will go through more updates. I'm hoping it will go through more updates as more results come in, and so that's built into sort of the architecture of the tool, that it's not static, but that it's updatable going forward.
Great, thanks, Shari. Before I'm going to ask, we're kind of coming out to we only have 10 minutes left in our hour. Amy, I see you have a comment. Please go ahead.
All right. It's nice to hear from everybody, and I'm still on the east coast of the U.S., so it's still morning here. I hate to be the one that goes back all the time to what to me is a fundamental question, but we're still obviously wrestling with the supply versus demand issue here. And what I've heard in the last 50 minutes is that the supply side is still getting most of the attention. We're going from phase 1 into phase 2. We have new data. We're developing new wraps and adaptation packages. We're updating our science and experiments based upon that new information, but we're not balancing that with the new information that we're getting from our engagement with stakeholders. Somehow I sense an imbalance. And unfortunately, I don't have many answers in this case, but I'm just really concerned that we're still trying to build the Impact Explorer based mainly on a supply side equation. And we did talk about this in Vic Falls. And Alex, going back to your point, can we not build something that we can just keep updating as we collect new information? Well, until we know who this is for and what decisions we expect this to affect, I'm not sure we should really bother with that. Carolyn, your point back to the conclusion Sabine's team had about whether or not maize is in the mix, that's interesting. It's also a politically hot issue in Zimbabwe. Does that need to be shared? Yeah, it does, but it's a very sensitive issue. So again, until we have a more refined and more carefully thought through picture of who's going to be using these findings in which particular decision-making processes, right? Whether they're policy processes, technology package development processes, I think Jaska and her team are never going to be able to finish what we've set them out to do.
So I'd like
Thanks
to
for
jump in
that
on
comment.
for a second.
Does someone have a response?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree definitely in the sense that we need to get this input in. I mean, my recollection of the Victoria Falls conversations was that we tried to lay out a timeline to have these things happen, and you can still see on the screen this presentation of a mock-up of the Internet Explorer in South India. This to me really kicks off the phase I think that Amy is looking for, which is how do we get the inputs from the stakeholder liaisons and various teams into the mock-ups and the development of the Impacts Explorer. And I think that's very important. I mean, my recollection of the original timeline is that they would use this November meeting and then come in February kind of with that first draft, which I believe is so the iterations, first prototype kind of by the end of January in 2016. That's where we're going to get a lot of that input from the stakeholders. So I do think we are hearing from stakeholders about the shape of the reps and the adaptation packages, and that's going to be kind of more demand driven. And then as we see these the prototypes, I think we're going to start to be able to get that feedback in. And maybe between November and January, we can think a little bit more about this stakeholder team. We had a name for that, like the group that would help Jaska and Sandra and their team develop the Internet Impacts Explorer. But I think the procedure is there in terms of how refined and detailed it has to be. Certainly, if we make our prototype too detailed, it'll be very hard to slot new information in. But I don't think that's the expectation. I think it's more of having the larger framework of be flexible enough to take some of those new data sets in.
Can I also add one thing? I still see the Impacts Explorer as an instrument to convey outcomes of the ICMIP project, and we've seen in other projects that, or with tools that we developed, that policymakers sometimes used the tool to create brochures or flyers, or took some of the visuals to put in PowerPoint presentations, and that they themselves use these to make presentations for general public or for some other groups. So in my mind, I thought in Zimbabwe we sort of came to a general conclusion that it would be most likely that in that part, in that region at least, policymakers or the so-called technocrats would be the main users, and perhaps there were some secondary users, but at least that is the type of person you're looking at. But that doesn't, of course, impede other people or hinder other people to use the Impact Explorer. But it would be very difficult to, I would like that, in an ideal world I would like that, to do a full user analysis for all regions who the specific main user types would be. So that's sort of, finding, we have to progress, we have to start building now, start developing also. And I personally feel that we will be able to adjust the content of the key messages to such an extent that it will be understandable for a large user group, and that this the set of background data that you access through the data exploration tool will then be usable for another group of users. So there's still a lot possible, and I agree with Amy that we should constantly keep our ears and eyes open to where's the biggest need, so where can we make ourselves most useful. But the Impacts Explorer is only one of the outputs of the ECBIP project, and there are so many others that we cannot. It's not the full responsibility of the Impacts Explorer to convey all these results. I'm sorry for this is perhaps taking a bit longer, but we have to move on and focusing on policymakers and see how far we can get from there would seem the most logical step after our Zimbabwe meeting and also earlier meeting in Arusha. Is there some comment on that?
I'd like to invite Jim, who was very much looking forward to this presentation, to perhaps say a few words of his impressions so far. I do see that there's a little chat going back and forth about the upcoming meeting that will be in Senegal in the last week of February, and make sure that we have time for iterating on things to do with the Impacts Explorer there, which we will for sure. I also understand that there will be a convening, I believe, similar to the one that's happening in South Asia for the Africa teams, an exchange going the other way. Sometime between now and the Dakar meeting, or maybe the timing on that has been shifted, I'm not sure, but that will be a good opportunity as well. But anyway, we're down to, our last minute. Jim, have you some reflection comments or guidance in next steps? And you're muted, in case you have to take your mute off yourself, it looks like. I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I didn't mute it. It must have muted itself somehow. But anyway, yeah, I've been listening and appreciating all the points and issues that were raised. Before I comment on that, though, I did like the diagram that shows the site structure, and I think it's structured pretty well. I like that very much. Cheryl and I were talking about it. One of the concerns that we have is, the teams getting their data in and getting it in correctly, and I don't think that was mentioned today, but I think that is still an issue to get even the phase 1 results finished and finished well so that this can be done. I believe that the concerns that Amy raised about supply or demand driven is always going to be an issue that we have to be aware of and work with. And I think even Yoski, when she first started out, pointed out the collaboration that's required. So I think this just is going to need communication among the different teams, including the data provision from the individual teams, the checking of it through the IT team, and the two IT, the Impact Explorer tool development and the stakeholder unit. It seems like they need to be in very good communication as we move forward on this. I don't know how far we'll be able to get ultimately. We have some concerns about whether phase 2 results will be ready in time to really check everything out carefully and make them available. I hope they are, but I think as a first step we just really need to make sure that phase 1 is done and all of the steps are taken to make sure that the feedback is given from the stakeholders.
Thanks, Jim. We're at the top of our hour, so
Carolyn,
yes, Ken?
I want to just advertise that we'll have a crop modeling webinar tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Cheryl and two AgMIP representatives, John Dimes, John Hargraves, and I assume Garrett will be there as well. So get to discuss any specific issues on setups, surveys, and overlays.
Great, thanks for that, Ken. Yes, there's been a lot of activity in preparation for that webinar, lots of information about the data and the analysis going back and forth. It looks like it will be a good one. And it's at an hour that allows some round-the-world input, even though there will be discomfort of some.
No, we'll connect individually with modelers where specific problems show up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, great. Thanks very much, everyone, for your inputs. This session has been recorded, so if you would like to share it with another person on your team, shoot an email to Shari, and she can point you to the link. And unless there are any other comments or updates on other activities that are going forward, we'll wrap it up. I will also just, very quickly, it was in the agenda that I sent, but not in Jaska's, that reports are due this week for activities through September 30th. The closing date on that is October 30th. Depending on where your agreement originates, it could be going to USDA, it could be going to ICRISAT. We appreciate having a look at the copies of those reports. The template was circulated in conjunction with the October 12th call, so if you need to have a quick refresh on that, and please do. And many thanks to the teams that have already submitted their drafts for us to have a look at and to think about the results that you've had over that time. So again, thanks everyone for joining. You had good input today. Thanks very much to Jaska and Sander especially for putting together these slides that help us think about what the developments are and some of the challenges in the collaboration. And we'll look forward to, we didn't have time to identify actions specifically, but we'll look forward to some reflection and perhaps a follow-up via email as to the most important next steps to enable the further development. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carolyn.
Bye.
Bye.